Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have Sara Beller on the podcast talking to us about life as an assistant district attorney. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. It is my pleasure to introduce Sara Beller, a member of the District Attorney's Office in Riverside County in Southern California, and she's also a tutor with the Law School Toolbox. Today, we are going to be talking about careers in public service, specifically working as a prosecutor. So, Sara, great to have you here. Thanks for spending your early evening with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So to get things kicked off, can you share a bit about yourself and your journey to become an assistant district attorney?
Sure. So my path to law school, I always say, was a little dysfunctional. I started law school 3 weeks after I graduated undergrad. I didn't even have a summer break. And that's because I've known for such a long time that I wanted to be a prosecutor. There was no backup plan. So I went straight through college, straight through law school as a spring starter, and went straight through law school and took the bar right after. I always knew this is what I wanted, and I just always decided there wasn't anything that was going to stop me or get in the way.
That's awesome. So I love it when somebody really knows what they want to do. So many of us go to law school and are like, I could do these 10 things. So I think it's so refreshing when someone has like their guidepost. So what kind of drove you to want to be a prosecutor?
So I was the victim of a crime when I was younger, and the DA that prosecuted that case ended up becoming such a big part of my life. She ended up coming to my law school graduation and was at my high school graduation. And she just throughout that process, realizing she gave me a voice in that courtroom and in the process kind of restored some sense of balance in my little world. Like I said, we've stayed in touch, and I just realized that if I could do for even one other person what she did for me, what better way to spend a career?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I was actually talking to my dad, who was a career prosecutor for most of his legal career, about that, and how so often when we talk about careers as, prosecutors, we kind of don't talk about the victims that much, that you really are advocating for individuals. I think especially at the DA level, which is slightly different than at the federal level, where I feel like it isn't as much about, this one person who may have been hurt. And so I almost think that we kind of lose that so often in law school. We very seldom even talk about victims as far as the cases we learn or the procedure that we go through. It's always defendant focused and not really victims focused.
I completely agree. We talk about that all the time at work, that so often we can lose sight of, not we lose sight, but the system can sometimes lose sight of the victim. So it's really important to me, and was important when I was looking for what DA's office I wanted to work at, that I found one that had the same core value that I did as far as wanting to restore that sense of justice for the victims. Mm-hmm. So in my particular office, we like to say we give the victims justice and we bring the defendants to justice. Mm-hmm. And that was always a really big part of our office and our life as prosecutors there.
Yeah. So you knew you wanted to do this sort of job. You were very focused on it. So what did you do in law school outside of, I'm sure, taking things like criminal procedure and evidence and all the things that you needed to know to practice law in this area? But did you have any experiences that led you to this career choice in this path? Like, did you intern in offices? Like, what did you do kind of outside of your law school classes?
Yeah, so even before law school, I did an internship at a DA's office, the LA County DA's office here in Southern California. And during law school, I did a civil internship at a plaintiff's litigation firm. I think that's what they call them. I'm not versed at all anymore. And I did that just to make sure that I didn't have any buyer's remorse or wouldn't have any buyer's remorse down the road. Mm-hmm. I thought, you don't know something until you try it. So who knows, maybe I would enjoy civil. And I didn't. It was terrible for me. It was awful. And I ended up interning at the office I work at now. And all those experiences I had kind of led to where I am because they all showed me what I do want and what I don't want. As soon as I started interning at the office I work now, I immediately knew, even as I think I was going into my 2L year, I just knew I was home and that was where I was meant to be. So it's kind of cool now. The interns that supervise me are my teammates and they sit, down the hall. So it's cool.
That is great. It's a great sense of community.
It is.
So like I said, I grew up, my father was a prosecutor for most of his career. My mother also did a stint at the district attorney's office. So I had a very good understanding, possibly too much of an understanding as a small child, what the life of a DA looked like. So to the point where I don't know that I've told you the story that when I was little, so probably like 7, about the age my son is now, I didn't know what trial was, but I just knew that it meant that my dad wouldn't play his guitar and sing songs with me at night because he was always working. And
my dad was gone.
That was my whole association. It was like no guitar time.
Don't worry, things haven't changed.
Okay, good. I appreciate the consistency. It was a long time ago that I was 7. But I think a lot of listeners aren't necessarily familiar with what DAs do on their daily basis because most of it is what we see that is from TV shows, and that's not particularly realistic, generally speaking. So what is your day in the life and how has it changed in this COVID world? I wish we were in a post-COVID world, but I don't even know what we're in anymore. We're just in a pandemic world.
Right. It's just still happening.
Yeah.
So just like, with your dad, there are 2 different days in the life. There's if you're in trial and if you're not in trial, and those are very different days. When you're in trial, like you mentioned, you eat, sleep, and breathe that case. If you're not in court, and most trial courtrooms run 8:30 to 4:30. If you're lucky, maybe 9 to 4, but for the most part, 8:30 to 4:30. And if you're not there presenting your case to a jury, you're getting ready for the next day. You're up early in the morning and up late at night, getting ready for the next day. If you're not in trial, the days are much different. We usually go to court in the morning, handle the cases we have on calendar for that day, any hearings we might have, like preliminary hearings, argue any motions that we might have to deal with that day. Court's a lot of hurry up and wait, so it usually takes most of the morning, whether you have 1 case on calendar or 10. And the afternoons we spend prepping our upcoming cases, reviewing our evidence, writing motions, preparing for trial, meeting with victims and witnesses and families. And things have changed so much since COVID. Every day it seems like something else COVID related with the courts is coming up and changing how we do things. But one thing that stayed consistent was everyone's goal, the justice partners, which is the defense bar, the prosecution, the judges, our goal to maintain justice and continue to pursue justice as efficiently and safely during the pandemic as possible. So our courts never completely closed. We were doing video arraignments, so that defendants could assert their speedy trial rights and that wasn't being jeopardized. Things changed a lot as far as doing Zoom court was kind of weird, and appearing remotely on the phone was really weird. You hear people's dogs barking in the background when you're trying to make a court appearance and kids crying in the background. But everyone was really great. And, we all just kind of laughed and continued to do our jobs as best we could and just keep hoping that eventually things go back to somewhat of a normal day.
I know. It definitely humanizes the process when you hear everybody's life happening behind them.
It does. And seeing it in the background and
right.
Hearing people come home and keys rattling. It's been interesting.
Absolutely. So for students that are considering this who are considering this career path, what skills do you think are critical to have and to bring into kind of this prosecutorial role?
So as far as skills, critical thinking is incredibly important. Reasoning, communication is a big one. I think critical thinking, because that's what we do. We're analyzing and evaluating all of the information in front of us to form a conclusion ultimately. We're always communicating, so I think communication skills are really important. And that's not to say you have to be an extrovert to be a prosecutor. I am incredibly introverted. Every time I take Myers-Briggs, it's 99% introverted. Even if I try to, guess different answers, it doesn't work. Because we're always communicating, whether it's with potential jurors during voir dire or witnesses during direct examination or, trial preparation. And reasoning, I think, is another important skill for students to have that are pursuing this career path, because it's a truth-preserving strategy. I mean, if you apply deductive reasoning to true premises, true conclusions will follow. And that's what any prosecutor wants, is for the truth to come out and to do the right thing for the right reasons. So I think having those skills together in one person makes a pretty unstoppable force.
So you mentioned you were an introvert, which I think is kind of interesting to have picked this career path that has really high contact with people.
It does.
Did you find that kind of your personality structure made it more difficult to feel comfortable in the courtroom, or has it always been something that you've felt good about?
I never feel good about it. I'm always just constantly stressed. When the doors open and the veneer of jurors come in and just 90 people come in and I'm going to have to parade in front of, I just panic immediately. And it never goes away, no matter how many trials I've done. But someone told me a long time ago that if you're not nervous, it means you don't care. And the day you're not nervous is the day you should leave the job. And I've always really taken that to heart and just tried to ride the nerves as best I can.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When I did a summer job at the U.S. Attorney's Office, they allowed us to make limited appearances. And I remember standing in my suit and fully feeling my knees hitting each other under my skirt. Not just I wonder if my knees are shaking. I literally could feel my knees hitting each other. And I wasn't doing anything incredibly life-changing for anybody.
Just standing there and making
I was pretty much just standing there.
Right. That still happens to me. My hands just rattle and shake, and I have to wear certain dresses or shirts in court if I'm actually presenting a case, doing a trial, because I get red all the way up. And it's so noticeable that I have to, take precautions.
Yeah. I think oftentimes people don't really talk about the fact that litigators get really nervous. One of my good friends from law school, who I know does not listen to this podcast, is a family law litigator. And I mean, when we were in law school, she used to basically throw up before our moot court arguments.
Your friend and I have that in common. I would just hide as best I could in class and just pray I wouldn't get called on.
I know. And now, I mean, she appears in court all the time. She's a very successful litigator. So you just never know.
It works out somehow.
Yep. Okay, so you mentioned that you did intern at the DA's office, and in fact, at the Riverside County DA's office. Yes. I did an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which was an amazing experience as well. So I think this is a really exciting experience, and one that a lot of people don't really consider. Now, the bummer is you don't get paid usually, which is kind of a bummer. But sometimes you get... Yeah. But sometimes you get school credit, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I think when we were talking about this a while back, that you did an independent study, and that was one of the ways you got school credit.
Yeah, I was able to find a professor to sponsor me, so to speak, and kind of mentor me or supervise my study. And we built a little curriculum, and I was able to get course credit for my internship. So it was really great.
That is great. Did you do yours during the summer or during the year?
Both. Being a spring start in law school, my academic year ran with the calendar year.
Got it.
So I was a January to December academic year. So I was there. I did a summer internship, and then as well as my entire 3L year, which was January to December.
Amazing. So, like I said, sometimes you're allowed to appear in court. Were you also certified to appear in court?
I was under California. I think it's the ABA. They've changed it. I don't know. But then it was certain classes you had to take allowed you to be certified with the bar and appear in court under the supervision of a licensed attorney, and there were requirements for them as well. And our office was really great with giving interns actual court experience. I was able to do a jury trial as an intern.
That's amazing.
It was a great experience. And I think I did close to 40 or 45 preliminary hearings and argued countless motions. And I got to start building those relationships with the judges and the defense bar that I still have today. So it's a really great experience.
And talk about being sure about what you wanted to do by the time you graduated, because that's clocking a lot of hours.
Right. If I wasn't sure before, I was afterwards, or should have been at least by all the experience.
Right. If it was going to go south, it was probably going to go south before that. So, these are such great experiences. And I think a lot of times students aren't sure where they find out how to get these jobs, whether they be during the school year or during the summer. So how did you land your internships? And what advice would you have for others who are looking to gain this experience?
Yeah, so I had it wasn't OCI necessarily, but we had recruiters from the office, DAs that were kind of out looking for interns, come to my law school and do interviews just kind of independently. I signed up for a time slot, and that's how I was able to get the internship my 3L year. But I think a great resource that students don't always think to take advantage of is the professors on their campus. Your crim law professors, crim pro professor, evidence, any adjunct professors, that teach those elective courses that are geared towards criminal law. They're almost always going to have a connection or know someone who knows someone and be able to help you out that way. I think another great way is just go on your county's website or wherever you're going to be for the summer. If you're out of state or out of town for school and you're staying there for the summer, just hop on that county's website and just check it out. See if they have volunteer opportunities, employment opportunities. That's where you're going to find information for internships or externships.
I also think it's important, if you do have flexibility about your location for the summer, to apply to some of these offices that aren't so saturated. I think that if you're going to law school in a bigger metropolitan area, let's say you're in San Francisco, like the amount of law students floating around the Bay Area is going to kind of inundate the few county offices that you have kind of in the Bay Area. But if you're willing to go into the Central Valley, or you're willing to kind of go to even some of these areas that just don't have as many law students trying to get those jobs, sometimes you can also find different opportunities, or even an office that doesn't have as many interns, and then you may get a lot more exposure. So I think there's always this idea that you want these kind of big name offices. But I think when I was interviewing for jobs, that they really wanted to know what you did while you were there, and you really want those letters of recommendation and those references from your supervisors. And so I think that it can also be like you need to kind of shop around a little bit to see where you might be able to gain that experience. Or, like you said, do some of it during the school year, maybe some of it during the summer. You got to try and get in the door a few different ways.
Right. I completely agree. Interning at different offices is a great way too, like I mentioned earlier, to find what's important for you. Where's a good fit, a good sense of community, because the end of the day, look, we spend more time with our coworkers than we do with our families at home. So you don't want to be miserable going to work every day. You want to enjoy the community that's there and enjoy the relationships that you're going to have, especially if this is what you want to do for your career.
Yeah. And if you're looking for an office that you really want to stay in, build those relationships in, you want to make sure that it's a good fit. It's in a place you probably want to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what do you think, when people are applying for these jobs, what they should think about when they do their application, if it's written or if they're writing a cover letter? What do you think is important to highlight about their interest in these kind of roles?
I think something that's really important to highlight that sometimes students will overlook is anything that you've done that shows you have an interest in criminal law or being a prosecutor or a litigator. Highlight that on your resume, move that to the top, or somehow emphasize that you have those interests. If you've done the criminal justice club, or you've taken trial advocacy or litigation classes in school. If you have a connection to the geographical area where you're applying, highlight that in your cover letter. Explain why that office in particular is important to you, or you have a connection to that area. That I think is really going to make students' applications stand out.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good point. I also think, when going back to talking to professors, which I thought was such a good point, to try and build this network and this relationship, looking at your school for those criminal law, practical, either clinics or programs that your professor might run, just to really show your commitment and collect as much exposure to this as you can in a practical way. I know one of my favorite crim professors ran a death penalty defense clinic, and that was kind of his passion. And he placed students there over the summer, and, students who are really passionate about criminal work oftentimes found that they've got involved in some of that. I think that it's just exposure and investment in this area of the law. It can come from a lot of different ways. And I think you don't always have to say, like, if you want to be a prosecutor, that you would never work at a death penalty defense clinic. I don't think.
No, of course
right?
not.
It's
I did. I worked at the Innocence Project when I was an undergrad, and I was in the most conservative county in the great state of Texas, and was at the Innocence Project, and it was great experience. It's all good experience, because at the end of the day, there's no such thing as bad experience. It's something to add to your resume to show that you have that interest in that area of the law, and hey, it all counts.
Well, and this is about understanding all the pieces, right? I think that
Absolutely.
If you understand how each side functions in their role, as you were talking about, right? Your role to try and find truth.
Right.
I think that just makes you a better advocate for whatever side that you are, you're working towards, because in the end, we're all advocates. We're trained advocates, right? And
right, I completely agree.
And it's all about feeling confident in your role, feeling confident that you can also anticipate what the other advocates are going to do.
Right. You have to anticipate the other side for sure, and being familiar with that side obviously helps you do that and helps you be more prepared for your client and to be able to advocate for your client, whether it's the people of the state, the people of the United States, or an individual. And like I said, in our office or our county, I guess we call everyone the justice partners, because it's true. Everyone works together and everyone has the same ultimate goal of justice, no matter who they represent or what side of the bench they sit on. And knowing how all those parts fit together and taking advantage of opportunities to see how they all fit together is, I think, really important and a good opportunity for students.
Yeah. So one thing that a lot of times people don't think about is that you have to do a lot of paperwork when you get these jobs. Yes. And I'll be honest, as the daughter of a federal prosecutor, I knew of the security clearance because it was ominous in my house. Every time my dad's clearance came up for some sort of renewal, you could just hear the moaning of the record keeping.
And then the 70 pages printing out.
Exactly. And then it was so funny because when I had to do my preliminary security clearance, I mean, your internship security clearance is not particularly, your background check or whatever the requirement is not particularly in depth.
Right.
But and look at the list of you have to list all these places you've lived for the last 10 years or something like that. And I remember being on the phone with my mom and being like, man, Mom, all these places. And she's like, hold on one second. She's like, I hear her in the background. She comes back. She's like, after suffering through your father's career of security clearance, I have a file folder with every place you've lived ever.
Your mom is so smart.
I know. She's like, because I thought maybe someday you would have some job. She, at this point, didn't even know I was going to go to law school. My parents were both lawyers. But she's like, I just thought someday you might need this information. And I didn't want to repeat what we had to do, which was comb through.
Yes, I love that.
Stuff.
She must have been so happy that all of her hard work wasn't in vain. That
exactly.
Something good came out of it.
She's like, I'll read you the file folder.
That is great. I wish I would have thought of that, because having to look back on every place you've lived and every person you've lived with. I mean, your freshman dorm roommates, I don't know where they are. Maybe they've gotten married by now. Who knows? It's been
I know.
such a long time. It's unreal.
Yeah. Yeah, there was definitely a few funny things. And thank you, Amazon.com, for, always having my history of everywhere I
Right.
lived. That was the other place I checked. So
There's always that.
Amazon knows everything. Basically, we should just give them our Amazon usernames. I feel
you should be able just to have them compile the file folder.
Totally.
So the
just
world
be
don't have to do it.
Press print. You can also see what type of toilet paper I order. It'll be great.
Exactly.
I know. But I do think that sometimes people forget that there's some practical pieces to these, the background checks, the security clearance, and the paperwork can be obnoxious, but you also have to do so much of the same paperwork to get licensed for the bar that I think a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to go through all that hassle, but you're going to have to go through basically the hassle no matter what.
Exactly. No matter where you work, because before you can start working, you're going to have to do the paperwork for the bar.
Yeah.
Just save the information somewhere.
Exactly. So right now, just start your file folder right now, or your note on your phone. Take a clue from my mom from 20, 30 years ago, or however long.
Make that file folder.
I know she started that file folder. I guess it was only 20 some years ago, but still. So how many years have you been a DA now? I
am coming up on my 5th year.
All right. So you've got a kindergarten profession at this point.
Yes.
Your profession is a kindergartner. And so what's been the most surprising thing about your work as a DA?
I think what's really surprised me the most is how much every case I've tried, it's become a little part of who I am. It's not like when a case is over, because you spend so much time working on it and preparing and meeting all the players involved. It's not like when that's over, you just never think about it ever again. I think most career prosecutors have a really special place for their cases, and they're really protective of that space. So I was really surprised by that not that it stays with you in a bad way, just that it kind of becomes, a little part of who you are. And you don't forget any of your cases. You don't forget any of your victims or witnesses. They'll kind of always be in that space. I was also really surprised by how well everyone works together. Like we were talking about with the justice partners, and how everyone's really dedicated to ensuring that justice is achieved. And it's not, the fighting like cats and dogs, or the antics we unfortunately see on television, because those shows make our jobs as real lawyers much more difficult. But yeah, I think those couple things have kind of been surprising in a really good way.
Mm-hmm. I like the fact that you mentioned about the cases staying with you, because you're working so intensely for this period of time.
Yeah.
That, both the ones that had the outcome that you were hoping for and those that didn't, I'm sure do stay with you in different ways.
In very different ways. And using the not favorable outcomes to really self-reflect and realize, what can I do differently? Was there something that a point that you can pinpoint to and say, is that where it started to go wrong, and what happened, so that you fix it going forward? Like I said, those things, they really stay with you.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, one other thing I wanted to mention, if someone is interested in doing this sort of work and isn't that comfortable at this point in public speaking, did you do anything to kind of get comfortable being in front of a room or practice public speaking, or did it just kind of come with practice?
I hate it so much I couldn't even practice, because I just can't even talk to myself without being stressed out. No, but I took advantage of the classes in law school, like the trial advocacy class we were talking about. And I took a negotiations class and a pretrial litigation class, things that forced me to do that and try to get as comfortable as possible. I don't know how much it helped, because I'm still incredibly stressed out all these years later. But trying as best you can to take advantage of those opportunities, internships that give you that real experience where you can go into court, or, mediation, anything that kind of forces you to get out of your comfort zone. If you're introverted like me, I think kind of helps.
Yeah. I've also known students and lawyers who've even tried things. I mean, this is not really COVID timing, but like even Toastmasters, where they just have to get up and talk about something, or you can take a
Right.
public speaking class at a community college over the
Right.
summer.
That's a good idea.
Just even take an acting class. I think that
Right.
sometimes getting out of your intellectual space and just working on these skills, I think can help. I know that I used to do back in a former life, I did a lot of performing. And every time even when I was a civil litigator, would like be dressed up to do something important. Not that I did that many important things, but it seemed like I was important. It's you're still like almost playing a role. Like it's not really you. It's like, the lawyer version of yourself.
Right.
And I even felt that way when I would teach at a law school. It was like my professor version of myself was different than my,
Right.
other version of myself. And so you can, I think, practice to kind of develop those frameworks. So it can feel a little less vulnerable if you're showing up, because you're getting dressed up. It's almost like a costume. It's not really,
Absolutely.
I'm sure it would have to be a little strange working from home because like that's really the meld of all your worlds, right? You're trying to be this version of yourself while there's like a dog or a spouse or a child behind you. I know I struggled with that during some COVID times where I'd be like, sorry, I'm on, a sales call and I've got a 2-year-old like pulling at my shirt or
On
whatever.
the hip bouncing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the character of yourself. I've had supervisors say that they tell me, even around the office that obviously still work and professional. They're like seeing you in the office, chit-chatting, bantering down the hallway with someone is so much different than the person that is in court that I've seen, in front of juries and in front of judges. And it's true, just kind of accepting that I think has helped me not be so concerned about public speaking or try to push down whatever nerves I can, is just accepting it's a role. You unfortunately got to squeeze into those tights, those pantyhose, and zip the skirt up, put the heels on, and go be that person for the day. Something else that might help is improv classes at community colleges. I know that can kind of force you to break the mold if you're someone who's really serious and kind of has a hard time letting those walls down. That might be something that would help students too.
Yeah. And get comfortable that you're probably going to screw up. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but I did screw something up in federal court that summer that I worked there pretty badly. And the judge reamed me in open court, mostly to ream my supervisor who didn't proof all my work. But I was like, deer in the headlights. Like I walked out of the building. I called my dad. I was like, maybe I should just go home. And he was like, well, now at least you've been yelled at by a judge. Welcome to the club. Who hasn't been yelled at by a judge, And I was like, that's not what that felt like.
You got to get that first time over with early.
Right, exactly. It's like when you get called on in class and you don't know the answer. It's like, you might as well just get it over with. It happens to everybody.
It will inevitably happen at least once. So just try to get it over with.
Yes. But I think the nice thing about like improv classes or, speech class or doing something where the cost to any sort of failure is so low that it's just nice to practice being uncomfortable in those situations when it's like a huge safety net,
Because I completely agree.
Yeah. Because the stakes feel, luckily in that situation, because I basically had no power because I just finished my first year of law school. Really, what did I know?
Right.
But luckily I had no power. So there was really no big consequences to my mistakes. But I definitely would say I didn't make that same mistake again, ever.
So. Right, and you probably never would going forward because all it takes is that one time, just like when you get called on in class and you're unprepared. Yes, you won't make that mistake again.
Yep, exactly. The painful ways to learn. It's funny. I vividly remember that conversation on the sidewalk in Oakland, just being like, I should just go home. Like, this is a terrible idea. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, you also tutor for us here at the Law School Toolbox.
I do.
And so I always have to ask my tutors when they're talking about something on the podcast, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to every law student?
Oh, so the first one I would have to say is learn how to write in IRAC format and make it a habit early. Stop fighting it. Just accept that IRAC format into your heart. The better off you'll be, I promise, because it is the only way to pass your law school exams and ultimately the bar exam. So just practice now. Ask your professors for feedback on your writing and just ask for help when you need it if you don't understand what someone says when they mean you have to write in IRAC or this is conclusory in your A portion when you're doing practice essays. Reach out and ask for help because the faster and sooner you make it a habit, the better off you'll be.
Well, I agree with that answer, which is why I hired you to work for me because I love that answer.
It was a very rehearsed answer. I remember
That's
saying
okay.
that.
I love it. I love it. You're just playing to your audience.
Always. I think another thing I would say is set a minimum 2-week study schedule with specific tasks to accomplish, not just a block of time that says study contracts. Specifically in that block of time that you've blocked off, what are you going to do for contracts? Do that for 2 weeks at a time and stick to that schedule, most importantly. Accountability is everything, and a lot of times we're the only ones to hold ourselves accountable as law students. Even lawyers, I still do that. I have my daily to-do list of things in the office I need to get done. So having those specific tasks that are tangible that you can point to versus just study, I think is helpful for students and something important to kind of start making a habit early on. And lastly, it was 3 things.
It was 3
pieces of advice.
Yeah, you can make more if you want. You can make your own list. It's totally up to you.
So one other one I would say is protect your reputation. Your reputation is your most valuable asset as a lawyer, and you start building that reputation on your very first day of law school. Respect your classmates, the professors, the faculty. Don't gossip. Dress appropriately. People won't remember where you ranked in school or who got the fancy internships and who clerked for what judge. They will always remember how you conducted yourself, how you treated other people. And that's what your reputation is at the end of the day. So really protect it. Yeah,
that's a good point. When I was a 1L, we did moot court in the spring, and our argument was this fact pattern. I still remember it. It was a long time ago now, but it was about whether or not biting off someone's ear when you're HIV positive was assault with a deadly weapon. That was a fact pattern. Anyway.
No wonder why you remembered it. It's such a traumatizing fact pattern.
It was a little traumatizing. But they always had alumni come and sit as the judges. And when I applied to firm jobs, I was at a lunch with someone on my callback interview that turns out was one of the people that was on my panel. And it took us a while to figure out how we knew each other, but she remembered my argument. And I think that was one of the reasons that she advocated so hard for me to get that job. And I think sometimes in law school, especially, like, that's a pass-fail class. A lot of people don't really, it's like if you show up and you have a good faith effort, they're not going to fail you out of moot court.
Right. Not going to try as hard.
Right. But I do think it was such a great lesson of, like, you don't know who's in the room. Because if I'd bombed it, I may not have gotten that job, which turned out to be the job that I ended up taking. So, and she is still a friend. She and I are actually going hiking on Thursday. She's still a friend and mentor. I know. But it is just really interesting, I think, how you often don't know where these important people will show up in your life.
It's so true. We had in one of those, I think it was my pretrial litigation class in law school. It was a 2L second semester, I think. And the professor was an adjunct professor. And she tried to teach us the hard way, the you don't know who's in the room lesson. So it's the very first day of class. She sent out the syllabus the night before I don't mean late at night, like late for me is like 8:30, but I have a very strict 9 o'clock bedtime. So you send me a syllabus at 8 o'clock the night before a class, and there was, I think 70 pages of required reading and so many written questions we had to have physically ready to turn in for a grade. Anyways, we fast forward to the next day. Everyone's kind of upset sitting in class because class was supposed to start at 6. Now it's 6:30. She's nowhere to be found.
Wow.
No professor. We're all sitting around and we're maybe, talking a little smack because everyone's really frustrated. We're complaining about the syllabus situation or not getting any sleep, so we're cranky. And now it's 30 minutes late and you're going to make me late for bedtime again. So we're all really upset. It was a pretty small class. There was about 18 to 20 of us. And, sure enough, she walked in and she was reading from her phone or tablet some of the things that we were saying, pointed out of who was wearing what, and the particularly not nice things that we were saying about how upset we were and frustrated with her and irritated with her. And, the girl in the black jacket said this, and the guy in the plaid shirt said that. She had her assistant, her paralegal, in the classroom.
Oh my.
That was listening to what we were saying and was sending her messages to teach us a very hard lesson of you don't know who is in the room. So always conduct yourself professionally and appropriately. And when it's the most important is when it feels like it's the most difficult to act appropriately and professionally. But lesson learned the hard way. You never know who's in the room.
That's true. That's a great story. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so fun. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thanks for taking time out of your busy week to chat with me.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to myself or Alison at Lee at lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison at lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always reach out to us, including Sara, on our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.